Hi guys, welcome to today's Saturday session with ExamRevision. My name is Áine and I'm going to be talking to you today all about the Leaving Cert Maths higher level exam, which is going to be taking place obviously in June 2022. And we're going to be focusing on some exam tips and some predictions about what we might expect to see on the exams this year. So first of all, just a quick reminder that we are running our May revision courses from today for the next 7 days. And in these in these May revision courses, we will be focusing on the 2022 upcoming exams. We'll be focusing on common topics. You'll be given H1 notes and we'll be discussing all things exam techniques and tips. And I suppose really importantly, when we're kind of going through this content with you, we will be, very much focusing on the exam, which is only a few weeks away. So it's literally kicked off this morning. But what's really great is that you can watch them live or you can watch them on demand. So some of the times might not suit you over the course of this week, but you can actually still sign up and the Zoom recording will be sent to you afterwards. So even if you don't want to be attending live, that's absolutely no problem. You can actually go back and watch them at a later date. So these are all available to book through ExamRevision.ie, and the courses that we have available for Leaving Cert is Biology, which is taking place right now. We have Leaving Cert Maths this afternoon from 2 until 5:15. We have French on Monday, Business on Wednesday, History on Saturday, and Spanish on Saturday as well. And if you know anyone doing the junior cycle, we also have home ec, science, Irish, maths and English taking place over the course of the next week also. So for further information on that, if you just log on to examrevision.ie and you'll be taken through to the course booking section. So let's get started then. So first thing we want to talk about today is the adjustments for our 2022 papers. And I think, you should be relatively familiar with this now at this stage, but just a reminder that both higher level and early level students, paper 1 and paper 2 is going to be split up into section A and section B as usual, but section A is going to be worth 120 marks for this year's exam. And it's going to be split into 4 questions of 30 marks each. So there will be 6 questions on the paper in section A, and you will be required to answer any 4 of them. And previous years, they would have been 25 markers. This year, they're 30 markers, but again, very similar in format to previous years. So definitely, obviously, look back through past exam papers to get a feel for what they will look like. And then on both paper 1 and paper 2, we also have section B. Section B is where we look at our context and applications. They will be considered that little bit more tricky, I suppose, because there's a lot of crossover between different chapters. And section B is worth 100 marks this year, and it is going to be split up into 4 50-mark questions. So therefore you have to answer 2 of those questions. So again, out of the 4 questions, you will take 2. So in total then, when you go into your Leaving Cert exam for both paper 1 and paper 2, you will be answering 6 questions out of the 10 that are in the paper, 4 from section A and 2 from section B. And again, for section B, they would look similar to previous section B questions in the context and applications, but I suppose just be aware that they are 50-mark questions, so they might vary a little bit, might be slightly limited compared to other years. But again, it's well worth having a look at all the section Bs from previous years because the format will be similar enough. So that is your adjustments. Moving on next, I want to talk to you really quickly about just some quick exam tips. Now, again, a lot of these things are pretty obvious, but let's just go through them really quickly. So as always, revise the basics. So if there's anything that you always have known, let's say it's something in algebra, like simultaneous equations, or something in French statistics, like p-values or something like that, and I'm not saying they're necessarily basic, but they're like parts of the course that you've always said, oh, that's something I'm never really good at. Go and get help and figure them out, because they will make you feel so much more confident going into your exam. Make sure when you're reading through your exam questions, both in the exam and when you're revising, like read them carefully and really look at the words that are being used, like factorize, solve, show, simplify, etc. Really kind of think to yourself, what does this mean? And, what am I being asked for here? And if you're not sure, look at the mark schemes and then kind of reflect and say, okay, now I understand. If I see that word, this is what I'm trying to do. As always, remember the importance of attempt marks. I'm sure all of your teachers have been going on at you about that for many, many years at this stage. And also don't assume later questions carry most marks, okay? You know yourself from the exam papers, the marks can go from 10 marks, 15, and then 5 at the end. You just don't know. So just give every question your best shot and don't be worrying about where the marks might be distributed within a question. In relation to timing, okay, so this is probably more important this year than other years because there is a bit of a choice, and sometimes the choice can nearly make it a bit more confusing. So my general advice to you would be, you have 2.5 hours per paper. I would be absolutely spending about 10 minutes at the start of your exam, reading through, flicking through, having a look to see what topics are coming up where. Absolutely, I think that's so important. Once you've decided, okay, these are the 4 in section A I like the look of, and these are the 2 in section B I like the look of, then you can get straight in. And what I would be saying to you as a general rule, roughly speaking, divide the amount of marks by 2, and that will give you a rough estimate of how much time you should spend on the question. So again, for your 30 mark section A's, I'd be spending about 15 minutes per question. Obviously, if you need a couple more minutes, that's fine, but just try not to go over maybe 18 minutes or so. And then you've got your 4 questions done. So give or take, you should be getting your section A completed within about an hour and 5 minutes. You would have spent the first 10 minutes or so reading through your exam. So let's say that brings you to an hour and 10, max an hour and 15. Then for your section B, I would be saying 20-25 minutes. You'll probably need 25 minutes, to be honest, on a lot, particularly paper 1. You might need a bit more time on some of those questions. So once that's all done and dusted, you're looking at probably reaching the 2-hour mark. So you're going to have approximately half an hour left, okay? Again, that's if everything has gone to plan. So you have half an hour left and you're thinking, what should I do now? I would probably be saying to you, and again, this is very much dependent on how the rest of the exam has gone. You may think, yeah, I might have time to get another section A question done and maybe another 10-15 minutes to tweak a section B that I thought was a bit difficult. If there is one question, particularly in section B, that has gone awful, you may decide, you know what, I need this half an hour to either spend time on it or actually try a new one. But I definitely wouldn't be going into the exam with the intention of having to get 3 section B questions done. I don't think that's going to be the best use of your time. So only do another section B if you feel like you've really kind of messed up one of the other ones. And remember, taking time to fix up a question can be just as beneficial as doing another one. So don't be putting yourself under pressure to get loads of extra questions done. Track your time spent per question. I think that's so important. You can get so caught up in the maths of one question, and it's not that you might have time to come back on it, and hopefully you will, but maybe keep going and say, right, I've got another 10 minutes I need to spend on that question, but I'm going to come back and do it later on in the exam. Again, remember how important those section Bs are. They're worth 50 marks, so you don't want to be rushing your section Bs in the last half an hour. If you ever use a calculator in a question, make sure you're showing all your calculations on your exam within reason, obviously, but don't just throw it all into your calculator and write just the answer on your paper. In your formula tables, like, use them, whether it's paper 1 or paper 2, write down the formulae that you think is relevant. And remember, a lot of the time in the Leaving Cert, you won't get attempt marks unless you do some correct substitution into the formula. So do make sure, even if you don't have all the information for the formula, sub in what you have. So for example, if you were asked for the equation of a tangent to a circle and you knew the point on the tangent, but you weren't sure of the slope, just sub in the point and leave the slope as m, because again, you will hopefully get some attempt marks for that. Always draw sketches of those trickier questions. You know, if you're doing a 3D trig question, go and draw yourself 2D triangles to visualize what's going on, circle questions, etc. Like, draw diagrams. Watch out for your minus signs. And I know that seems so basic for a Leaving Cert tip, but honestly, I've seen some top higher level students, let's say, I don't know, Pythagoras' theorem or the cosine rule, and they put they're putting something in, it's not going to work out, they mess up with minuses and it throws them off. So just make sure that you're always putting any of your negatives, let's say, into brackets, and be careful when you're squaring them. Do common sense checks with your answers where kind of possible, and always check at the end of a question 2 things. Have I rounded it to the correct degree of accuracy, whether that's decimal places, significant figures, and have I included units where possible? You can lose 1 mark per question for not doing those correctly. So again, it's a really important one to make sure you're not messing up on. Next thing to talk about then is your topic breakdown. Again, what I would say is really important to note is these are kind of rough breakdowns, but as I've said here, it is possible that some elements of the course may come up on either paper. For example, area and volume coming up on paper 1. So again, these are rough guides, but don't be surprised when you're doing your revision that you might see a bit of area and volume or Pythagoras or different things like that showing up on paper 1. So the topics that we need to know for paper 1 would be number, indices and logs, complex numbers, proof by induction, sequences and series, financial maths, algebra, functions, differentiation, integration. And then for paper 2, we have probability, statistics, geometry, which includes your constructions and your theorems, the line, the circle, trigonometry, transformations and enlargements, and length, area and volume. So even after your paper 1 exam in June, even take a little while to reflect and think about the topics that have come up and think, is there anything kind of missing from paper 1 that didn't come up? And maybe something like that could end up appearing to complement a question in paper 2. Okay, the next thing I want to talk to you about, and this is something that I think is really useful when you're doing your revision at this stage in the year, is to look at the breakdown of topics that appear on paper 1 and paper 2 per question. Now, look, obviously this is a very kind of wide spanning breakdown because, you know, complex numbers is made up of many different parts, and of course algebra is. They're all made up of many kind of more intricate pieces, but it's just to give you a rough idea of the patterns that we might see appearing on the exam. So again, as we know, question 1 to 6 is our section A, and then 7 to 9 or 10 would be our section B questions. So when you're revising, I would be saying to even refer back to this, you know, screenshot it or whatever in your from the video, and you know, start saying to yourself, if I am planning to leave out a topic, which again, we've never had to worry about until the last year or 2, like if you're planning to leave out a topic and you say, right, I think I might leave out, you know, calculus, I might leave out differentiation and integration, you can see very quickly from looking at this breakdown that that would not be a clever decision, because it, let's say last year, came up within question 5, question 6, question 8, and question 9, and question 10. Now, again, don't get me wrong, I know it might have been a small part in one of those questions, but it did appear within many questions. So we can see the light blue there for differentiation and integration is very much dispersed amongst the entire exam. So that would not be a clever decision when you're trying to maybe cut corners and maybe only focus on certain areas. The same with the likes of algebra and functions are red there. You can see they occur in many different places within section A's and section B's. So again, it's more just to give you an idea of where things occur. We can see, if we focus on just the section A's for a minute, that we seem to have complex numbers, which is the purple, coming up once every year within section A. We can also see within reason, predominantly proof by induction comes up as a question within section A, except for in 2020 where it actually came up in section B. But you can see in most other years when it appeared, it has come up as a section A question. Sequence and series, we can see again, is kind of mixed between a section A question and a section B question over the last number of years. So again, it's just giving you a bit more of a feel for what questions do I normally see coming up in section A and what questions do I normally see coming up in section B. Again, if we focus on just the section B's for a minute, we can see sequences and series seems to feature heavily we seem to have a good bit of differentiation and integration, and that seems to be kind of mixed in with a bit of length and area, or maybe a bit of trigonometry there as well, which we know is more so linked with our paper 2. The other thing that I suppose is important to note for this year, and I'm going to talk in a bit more detail now for the rest of this video about kind of some general predictions that I have, but we can see financial maths didn't come up at all last year. It came up as a section A the year before, so potentially we could have financial maths coming up like it did in 2017 as a section B. Again, who knows, but it's just something that I suppose, looking at the pattern, could be something that we would be able to predict from that. Moving on then to look at our paper 2 topics. Again, very kind of wide spanning breakdown here, but we can see some interesting things that, let's say, the line and the circle have come up nearly every year as their own kind of questions. Certain years they might be linked in with other topics as well. And we can see trigonometry, which is our green, comes up as a section A question and up to 2 section B questions. So again, we can see how important that is within paper 2. If we look at our probability and statistics, again, we're looking at it coming up as a section A, but also as 1, if not 2, section B questions. So, you know, if a student said to me, Áine, I'm going to leave out probability and statistics, I would absolutely not recommend that, because again, you can see very quickly from looking at this breakdown that it has come up in many, many different parts of the exam over the last number of years. So as I said to you, I think this is a really useful thing to have in front of you when you're doing your revision, and even when you're trying to maybe find different questions in your exam papers, you can quickly kind of reference and look at this breakdown, and it will give you a bit more of an idea of where to find the types of questions that you might want to be looking at. So what I'm going to do for the rest of this video is I'm going to go through not every single topic from the exam, but I'm going to go through a lot of the main topics from the exam. And basically what I've done, this is no magic formula and I've no inside line about what's going to come up in June, but I've just gone back through the last number of years of the Leaving Cert higher level exams. And I've just kind of taken note of the main topics that have come up within each of the questions that I'm going to focus on. And I've just tried to see if there's any things that maybe haven't come up in the last few years on the exam, so that, you know, the night before when you're doing a bit of last minute revision and you're trying to pick out a few different things that you want to focus on, that these might be some things that you throw your eyes over. I am absolutely not saying that these will all come up, and they won't all come up. There's no way. But again, it might just give you a little bit of a, you know, step in the right direction of some topics that we haven't seen appear on the exam in the last few years that maybe have a slightly higher chance of appearing than others. But we also know in the Leaving Cert, it is very unpredictable due to the nature of the fact that most questions do appear each year. It is a case of trying to know as much as you possibly can, but hopefully these little kind of steps in the right direction might get you set up and maybe revising some things that maybe you'd forgotten about, because I think sometimes we end up focusing on exam papers from the last maybe 3 years. We might not look back to the 2016s and the 2015s when there is maybe some topics within them that we haven't seen appear in the last few years. Okay, so I'm going to start off then by talking to you about algebra and functions, which we know obviously appears on paper 1. And one thing that I think is very likely to appear this year, either within the algebra and functions sphere or maybe the line in the circle, is simultaneous equations. Okay, so I think definitely simultaneous equations, it hasn't come up as a kind of an algebra question since 2018. So I think that would definitely be one to make sure you're confident with. And I know most higher level students would be, but again, throw your eyes over a few examples, you know, the night before the exam. Another thing that hasn't come up in a few years on the exam since 2018, I believe, is rational inequalities. So again, the reason I kind of reference rational inequalities is it's a question that students generally perform really well on when we're doing it within a chapter. But sometimes if you haven't seen it in a while, you might forget the trick. So when you're dealing with rational inequalities, you would need to remember that when we're multiplying across to get rid of the denominator, that we multiply by the denominator squared to allow for the fact that the denominator could be negative and therefore would require the inequality to flip. So that's a good one. It came up in 2018 if you're interested in having a look at how that did appear. Another thing, which again isn't something that's particularly groundbreaking, but just have a quick look back over how the discriminant works, or how we would determine the nature of the solutions or the roots of a quadratic. So those types of questions where we're being asked to figure out maybe a missing variable when we know the quadratic has two real roots. And we would be looking at your b squared minus 4ac there. Again, another just small thing that I thought hadn't come up in a couple of years was algebraic fractions. Identities, again, is something that hasn't come up in the last 2 years. So that could be something small that might appear within our Algebra and Functions chapter. Binomial expansion is something that we haven't seen on the exam. So that's definitely something to look back over. And within the functions chapter, again, functions appears within many areas of the exam. So I wasn't going to go breaking that down because it literally can come up everywhere. But maybe inverse functions is something that we haven't seen on the exam in quite some time, whereas we had composite functions coming up 2 years ago. In relation to, I suppose, how you're going to study this, or if you're trying to throw your eyes over these different things, I suppose be aware that we do have all this stuff broken down on the website. So if I just show you really quickly here our ExamRevision website, just to show you kind of where you would find all this information. So if you log on to examrevision.ie, you can sign up as a free user on the website, and you can just see the algebra topics. And then if you like what you see, you can sign up to our subscriptions and you'll be able to access all the material. But let's say you want to have a look at our algebra, and this is available for free to all our users. If you click into our Leaving Cert Maths and our video tutorials, if you go into higher level, and you'll see strand 4 algebra. And if you click in here to our expressions, inequalities, etc., you'll see all the videos that are available on the algebra topic. So for example, I mentioned there about rational inequalities. And again, that's just something small that you might have forgotten about, that you just need to watch for a quick 1-minute video. You can click in here, solving rational inequalities. And one great feature that we have on the website now is you can actually speed up the videos. So even though, let's say that says it's a 5-minute video, you can obviously put it on double speed and again, really quickly flick through it and kind of get the key information that you need. At this stage, again, you probably don't need to go through loads. And actually, ironically, I didn't even realize this until I've clicked on the video, but I actually go through the 2018 exam question there that I referenced. So, again, just something as an extra resource that you might find useful for your exam. And we do have the entire Leaving Cert Maths course broken down into videos. You'll see it there when you click in. We've got our algebra strand, statistics and probability, geometry and trig, number, functions, and then some extra kind of revision material for your exams. So back to our predictions then. Again, when you're going through these, as I said, they're just ideas and little things that you can be looking at to help you with your revision over the next number of weeks. Moving on then to sequence and series. As I said to you, and as I showed you from the breakdown of section, or of paper 2, or paper 1, I should say, sequence and series comes up in lots of different parts. So it's hard to predict because it does come up so often. And you know yourself, you've got 3 different kind of things to be aware of when you're studying sequence and series. You've got your arithmetic sequence and series, you've got your quadratic sequences, and you've got your geometric sequences and series as well. So again, be familiar with all of them because they do feature so heavily on the exam each year. But I suppose one thing that I was kind of aware of is that I do think it will definitely come up as a section B question this year, as well as a section A question. So do have a look at the section Bs to be familiar with it. And also sum to infinity didn't come up in the last 2 years. So again, might be something that we see referenced in the 2022 exam. Moving on then to proof by induction. Again, it might not appear this year at all. Sometimes it doesn't appear, but what I would say is looking at the trends over the last couple of years when it has appeared, inequalities hasn't come up for a few years, and also the proof of De Moivre's theorem. So when you're kind of looking through that, obviously the proof of De Moivre's theorem is linked with complex numbers, and that proof didn't come up since 2018. So it could be something to look over and be familiar with when you are revising the proof by induction chapter. Moving on then to talk to you about complex numbers. Look, I suppose number one on complex numbers is that De Moivre's theorem comes up pretty much every single year without fail. So do make sure you know how to apply De Moivre's theorem, how to put things in polar form. As I said, I'm not giving you, this is not the only topics you should know. These are just some kind of different ones that don't necessarily appear every year that I think could appear this year. The conjugate root theorem, I think, is definitely worth throwing your eyes over. And the conditions that allow the conjugate root theorem to work. So when we're dealing with the conjugate root theorem, the coefficients should always be real numbers. So if you do look back to the 2018 question, I believe, or sorry, the 2016 question, I should say, there's a really nice question there on conjugate roots and complex roots. So do have a look at that question. The other thing that occurred to me when I was looking back through the complex numbers questions over the last number of years is that there hasn't been too much in the last, 4 or 5 years linked with the actual Argand diagram. And I know it's more of an ordinary level question where you're plotting it and maybe reading the information from it, but I do think potentially something linked with transformations on the Argand diagram could appear. So looking at the whole idea that when we multiply by I, we're rotating 90 degrees anti-clockwise, and trying to recognize where the different points would appear on your Argand diagram. So again, that's just a small kind of part that I think could be worth looking back over. And also, as I mentioned previously, the proof of De Moivre's theorem hasn't appeared since 2018, so it could be something to throw your eyes over. Moving on then to differentiation. Again, what I would say about differentiation and integration, it is such an important topic on the exam, and it's very hard to make predictions on it because it appears in section A and section B, so many aspects of it appear every single year. But just, I suppose, going back over your turning points, your max and min, you're determining the nature of them. I think, again, that's something that we maybe haven't seen as a complete question in a year or two, so that could be worth looking. Differentiating trig and the likes of logs, indices and everything, go back over all of that, because again, that literally appears nearly every year, and it's more of it appears nearly every year than it hasn't appeared. Make sure you know how to do those. And then rates of change, again, is such an important thing to be aware of. But remember, like within the rates of change, we also look at the likes of displacement, velocity and acceleration. So something like that, again, could very much come up within a functions question as well. Then talking to you about integration, as I said, it's a question that appears every year in some shape or form. But one thing that hasn't appeared in the last couple of years is your trapezoidal rule, and linking that with your integration. So using the trapezoidal rule to estimate, and then using integration to find the exact value. And then we all know that question from the exams from a number of years ago, where you then go and work out your percentage error. So putting the error over the correct amount multiplied by 100. And then again, something that hasn't come up since I think 2018 is looking at the area between two curves. So that would be well worth looking back over, finding your point of intersection to find where you're integrating, and then figuring out which area you're subtracting from the other, and things like that. Financial maths, as I said, financial maths does not appear every year. It didn't appear last year. So it's more difficult, I suppose, to predict what may or may not come up, because it hasn't come up that much in the past. But I do think it probably will come up this year. And the fact it was a section A, when it appeared the previous time, we could be looking at a section B question for financial maths. So again, it could even be mixed in with other topics as well. So I would definitely, when I'm revising financial math, if that is a question that you are doing, maybe look back over in particular some of the section B questions. Moving on then to paper 2, and again, very much not a finite list here, but just a few little observations from probability and statistics. With probability, I would say, look, again, looking over the last number of years, the likes of Bernoulli does tend to appear quite a lot, expected value and things like that. But one thing that hasn't come up in the last few years would be the likes of permutations. And like there was a factorial algebra question that appeared back in 2018, and tree diagrams hasn't come up in that kind of pure sense since 2017. So again, could be worth having a look over. And then this is something that definitely has appeared in the last few years, but I think it's always really worth having a look over is your probabilities on Venn diagrams, where you're looking at independent, conditional, mutually exclusive, and things like that. As I said, Bernoulli did appear last year, but it is quite a popular question on the exam. So again, it could be something worth throwing your eyes over to make sure you are happy with it. Moving on to statistics, again, features heavily on paper 2. Statistics, however, has appeared mainly as a section B question in the last 3 exams. So I would be predicting that you probably will have statistics appearing in both section A and section B this year. Again, it comes up every single year without fail. You're probably going to have some reference to your normal distribution and your Z scores, but the empirical rule hasn't actually appeared in a number of years. So again, that's kind of something that would be worth looking back over to make sure you're happy with how that works. I believe it's 2018 since that has come up on the exam. And I suppose that's the thing with the empirical rule. You will be asked explicitly to use it. So make sure you do use it in your question rather than using your tables to find the exact probability. Scatter plots or scatter diagrams, they also haven't appeared in a number of years, and I think since 2017. So I wouldn't be surprised if something like a scatter plot might come up as a section A statistics question. So make sure you know how to calculate the correlation coefficient on your calculator, and make sure you're happy with how to draw the line of best fit, where you have the line going through as many points as possible with an even amount of points above and below your line. And again, just a bit of practice on that to be kind of familiar with how it works. And then the last thing that I would say within our statistics chapter is something that, again, we know features heavily as a section B question, would be your confidence interval and your hypothesis testing. And as far as I'm aware, I don't think hypothesis testing appeared as a full kind of question. Now, p-values were used, which obviously is one version of hypothesis testing, but it didn't appear, let's say, within a pure confidence interval hypothesis testing question. So again, I would be saying very likely to appear this year. And I would be honest, it's been kind of evenly spread between looking at your sample mean and your sample proportion. So when you're practicing these questions, do make sure you're practicing some sample mean ones and then some sample proportion ones. On the website, I do have all of that broken down into separate videos. So that would definitely, if that's something that you feel like you need a bit of help with, I would definitely recommend getting a subscription for just the month, and you can look through all those different breakdowns of those videos. The last few things then, guys, is talk to you about trigonometry. Again, it is something that we know comes up every year on the exam, and it's certainly something I would not be leaving out. And all these kind of topics that I kind of mostly focus on would be the main ones that you're going to be kind of concentrating on. 3D trigonometry is something that I kind of was looking at, saying it probably hasn't come up in its kind of pure sense with like loads of different follow-up questions on it over the last few years. So I think that's definitely something to look back over. Again, I just wrote it here. It's not a prediction really. I'm just saying area and volume comes up all the time with trigonometry. I'm not even going to try and make predictions on the area and volume because it quite literally could be any shape that you're dealing with, but just make sure you are familiarizing yourself with those questions where you're dealing with the likes of, you know, your cones and things like that, and similar triangles kind of mixed in within those trigonometry questions. one thing that, again, it kind of appeared last year, but I think it could be more of a matching exercise maybe, would be the likes of your transformations of trig graphs. So looking at like a sine graph or a cosine graph and maybe seeing it transformed around your graph in a few different ways and having to match your equations to it. Or kind of accurately drawing one of those transformations as well. And again, this is me kind of really just having a very rough guess about your proofs. One of your proofs, the proof of cos 2a came up last year. If one was to come up, again, it could be any of them from your trig identities, but maybe the proof of cosine or sine could be something to look back over. Moving on then to your line and your circle. Something that again hasn't appeared within our questions for a few years is your division of a line segment, which again could appear within the line or the circle. Another thing which I thought was interesting looking at was within your line chapter. Obviously, when we're talking about orthocenter, centroid, circumcenter, they're all linked with constructions, but they're also able to be kind of found looking at your coordinate diagrams. So again, this is going back to something that came up in 2017, I believe, where we were asked to find the orthocenter in a coordinate geometry question. So again, it could be something within one of those questions where they link in the concepts of orthocenter, centroid, or circumcenter within a coordinate geometry of the line question. As I mentioned already, simultaneous equations haven't come up in a few years. They could occur as an algebra question or maybe the intersection of a line and a circle question. Another thing that hasn't come up in a few years is the equation of a tangent. Now, there was a question in 2020 linked with the tangent, but it was more about finding the distance between the tangent and a point, whereas the equation of a tangent hasn't come up in a few years. So that's definitely something to look back over. Remember, when you're revising the equation of a tangent, there's two ways it can occur. One of them is a point on the circle, and one of them is a point off the circle. So again, your steps there would be different. And again, it's not much of a prediction, but just a problem solving with G, F, and C. We didn't have one of those last year. So again, something to definitely throw your eyes back over, where you're given your different hints and you have to then find G, F, and C. And then finally from me, just looking at geometry, again, when you're, I suppose, trying to break down, and again, the geometry chapter is made up of more than just constructions and theorems, but as I said, I find it would be quite difficult to predict anything more within that chapter because it could be anything. Obviously, similar triangles do come up quite a lot and they do complement other chapters. So definitely something to be aware of. But in relation to your constructions, I suppose back in 2019, the orthocenter was what came up. So something, I suppose, and back in 2015, we had the centroid of a circle. So look, again, kind of guessing here, maybe it would be worth having a look back over circumcenter and incenter as kind of two possibilities of constructions. But I do think if I was to pick between a construction appearing or a theorem, I would definitely be banking on a construction, since there was a theorem on the exam last year. So obviously, if you can and if you have time, try and look at all the Leaving Cert constructions. But they were just two that I thought haven't appeared before, maybe will come up this year. And as I said, Theorem 13 came up last year, so we might not have a theorem at all this year, but if I was to be looking over them, obviously I would be focusing on Theorem 11 or Theorem 12. So as I said to you guys, this was just a very kind of brief idea of some topics that maybe we haven't seen in the last few years to kind of familiarize yourself with and go back over coming up to the exams. If there's a topic that you have absolutely no idea of, I wouldn't necessarily be wasting hours and hours and hours just learning one of these, because again, these are absolutely in no way finite lists. You obviously need to go back, as I said before, go back to the basics, make sure you know how to do the stuff that appears every year. And if you have those things kind of sorted, then you could start looking at these predictions as just those extra little things that I want to make sure I know going into the exam. And as I said, when you're revising, use your exam papers, show as much work as you can, even when you're revising, and look at your marking schemes, and really for the next few weeks, focus in on how do I get the maximum amount of attempt marks in these questions. And always question when you're doing an exam paper question, what topic is this linked with? Am I happy with this chapter? Is there parts of this chapter that I'm not okay with? And do I feel like I want to spend time getting comfortable with them? Or am I deciding that's a topic that if it comes up, I know I just won't answer that question? And to be honest with you guys, that's okay too, because you do have choice on your exam. You just want to make sure you're not doing that with a large number of topics. And if I just very quickly flick back again to those paper 1 and paper 2 breakdowns, hopefully that will also help you to get a feel for what to be expecting when you open your exams. As I said to you, the Leaving Cert Maths course is not a particularly predictable exam because most things do appear each year. But at the same time, it's really nice going into your exam, having a bit of an idea, what stuff will I probably see in section A and what stuff will I probably see in section B. And please do allocate enough study time to look at both section A and section B questions, because the worst thing you can do is end up only focusing on your section A questions, and then you really struggle for those 100 marks for section B. So do make sure you are spending time on both of those. Thanks so much for tuning in today, guys. There will be other Saturday sessions taking place over the next few weeks, and also remember that all our previous Saturday sessions are available for you to view on our YouTube channel. So hopefully you'll find them useful, and best of luck in your exams.